August 4th, 1944. Brindisi, southern Italy, 9 in the evening. 7 Polish bomber crews stand in the briefing room of Campo Casale Air Base. In the back, 3 British and South African crews sit silent. The British officers haven't arrived yet. The Polish commander, Major Eugeniusz Arczuszkiewicz, closes the door. He looks at his pilots, and he asks, "Gentlemen, who'd like to go to Warsaw?" The room explodes. Every man stands at once. "Major, we'll go!" Arczuszkiewicz raises a hand for silence. He looks at his watch. 10 minutes until the British officers walk in. 3 hours until takeoff. 12 hours until the first Allied aircraft of the entire war flies over a burning Warsaw. He continues, his voice low. The flight is dangerous, long, nearly 900 miles to the city. No escort. The 3 most experienced crews go tonight. While the English aren't here yet, the drop zone is the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw. When the British officers walk in for the official briefing, redirect to area south of Krakow, 4 Polish crews have already made another decision. In the air, 3 Liberators and 1 Halifax will break from the assigned route and fly straight for Warsaw. They're going against the Royal Air Force. They're going without Soviet permission, knowing 3 other crews were dispatched to deceive the British briefing. And in the next 50 nights, their flight will lose 12 entire crews. In August 1944, 3 Allied governments decided, each for their own reasons, not to save Warsaw. Hitler wanted the city destroyed. Stalin wanted it to die alone before the Red Army arrived. And Churchill, after the first catastrophic losses, called the supply missions a wasted sacrifice and ordered the Royal Air Force to stop trying. Only 1 unit ignored all 3. 6 crews, 8 battered aircraft, 1,600 miles round trip over Nazi-occupied Europe. No escort. The statistical odds of not coming back, 1 in 11. Why? Everything you're about to hear is grounded in primary sources. The operational diaries of 2 Polish crew members preserved in the Warsaw Uprising archive, the memoirs of the British air commander who tried to stop the missions, and the televised testimony of a South African bombardier who was in the briefing room that night. The headstones at the Rakowicki cemetery in Krakow confirm the rest. This is the most thoroughly documented story this channel has ever told. It's also the most forgotten. August 1st, 1944. 5 in the afternoon. General Tadeusz Komorowski gives the order to execute Operation Tempest. 45,000 soldiers of the Armia Krajowa, the Polish Home Army, emerge from 5 years of underground hiding and attack German positions across more than 100 points in Warsaw simultaneously. The plan is to take the city before the Russians arrive, show the world that Poland can liberate itself, force recognition as an Allied power in the post-war order. In 3 days, the Poles control 60% of Warsaw. The white and red flag flies over buildings the Germans have held for 5 years. But 2 things go wrong at the same time. First, the Soviet advance halts. On August 1st, the very day of the uprising, SS panzers counterattack along the Vistula River. Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, commanding the First Belarusian Front, asks Stalin for permission to support the rising. Stalin refuses, and he pulls Soviet reconnaissance troops 12 miles south, out of artillery range. Second, the geography becomes impossible. The only way to reach Warsaw is from Italy. 1,600 miles round trip, 12 hours in the air, no escort, over territory entirely controlled by the Luftwaffe. On August 2nd, Komorowski sent a telegram directly to the Polish airbase at Brindisi, bypassing the British chain of command entirely. "Please send airdrops immediately. We need weapons and ammunition." The telegram reached the only Polish air unit based in Italy, the 1586 Eskadra Specjalnego Przeznaczenia. At that moment, the 1586 had just 6 operational crews and 8 aircraft, most of them, according to internal records, battered and not suitable for long, dangerous missions. The Halifaxes Mark II were patched. The Liberators were borrowed from other squadrons. The crews were, in their own commander's words, young and inexperienced, or had almost completed their tour, sometimes their second or third. This was the unit the Polish government in exile was asking to save Warsaw. And before the British briefing officers had even arrived, every pilot of the 1586 had already signed a single document. A document that survives in the archive today. 3 words, in English. Voluntary, hazardous, to Warsaw. Volunteers for dangerous duty, toward Warsaw. None of them knew yet that of the 6 crews who signed, 12 would be dead within 50 days. The first attempt was the insubordination of August 4th. 3 Liberators and 1 Halifax took off at 2100 hours from Campo Casale. Official British orders: redirect to area 30 kilometers north of Krakow. Real orders, given by Arciuszkiewicz 10 minutes before the British briefing began: Warsaw. 7 hours later, the first Polish aircraft to fly over their capital during the entire war crossed the burning city. The women of Plac Krasiński Square in central Warsaw were lying flat on the ground, flashlights tied to their chests, forming a cross of light, waiting. It was the prearranged signal. The containers fell. 50% reached the home army. 30% fell into German-held areas. The rest were destroyed in crossfire. 3 of the 4 Polish crews returned to Brindisi. The 4th, Liberator KG-827 of Lieutenant Mioduchowski, crashed on landing, riddled by flak. The crew survived. Official mission result: 1 ton of supplies delivered, 1 aircraft lost. Air Marshal John Slessor, commander of Mediterranean Allied Air Forces, read the report, and he suspended all missions to Warsaw. In his memoirs, he later wrote, "It was one thing to drop supplies to prearranged dropping zones, marked by light signals in open country behind the lines. It was quite another thing to bring a big aircraft down to 1,000 feet, flaps and wheels down, over a great city, itself the scene of fires and flashes from guns and bursting shells." Slessor wasn't wrong. He was just outvoted by what came next. The second attempt came on August 8th. 3 Liberators of the 1586 flew to Czerniaków in central southern Warsaw. All returned. But the result was modest. Barely 200 kilograms reached the insurgents. On August 11th, Churchill, in Naples, under direct pressure from the Polish government in London, ordered British and South African squadrons to join the Poles. The operation was back on, larger this time, and that's when the slaughter began. August 13th to 14th, 20 aircraft sent to Warsaw. 8 didn't return. And unlike the British bombing statistics over the Reich, where losses were considered acceptable at 3 or 4% per mission, the losses over Warsaw were 40% in a single night. Why? 3 systemic problems. First, the Luftwaffe operated a night fighter school in Krakow. The Germans knew the routes. They were waiting. Second, no Allied fighter had the range to escort a bomber to Warsaw and back. The crews were alone. Third, the drop doctrine required a maximum altitude of 500 feet for accurate container drops. Flying at 500 feet over a burning city meant being silhouetted by the German citadel garrison. It meant being a perfect target for flak. It was mathematically impossible. There was one more piece. In June 1944, German bombers had attacked the American shuttle base at Poltava in Soviet Ukraine, destroying 43 flying fortresses on the ground. Stalin became, in the words of American Ambassador Averell Harriman, suspicious and sensitive. When Roosevelt asked, on August 14th, for permission to use Poltava as an emergency landing base for the Warsaw missions, Stalin said no. Operation Frantic was dead. The American option was gone. What was left was the 1586, and whoever they could convince to fly with them. The Poles had been the first to fly. Now their insubordination was killing British and South African colleagues in skies they themselves had survived on August 4th. But they kept flying, because from their point of view, there was something the other allies didn't have. The city below was home. But on the night of August 14th to 15th, Before one of the deadliest missions of the entire operation, a man stood up from his chair in the Brindisi briefing room. He spoke in English with the heavy accent of a Pole who had learned the language in exile, and he asked for something no one expected to hear. 12 hours later, he was dead, and the South African who sat in that same room, listening, would remember the moment for the rest of his life. His name was Marian Szostak, flight lieutenant in the Polish Air Force, 28 years old, commander of one of the most experienced crews in the 1586. Szostak had a wife and a newborn son in Warsaw. When the squadron started flying to the city on August 4th, he didn't know if his family was alive or dead. Every mission was personal. That night, August 14th, there was something new in the briefing room. For the first time, Churchill had authorized British and South African crews to fly the direct route to Warsaw alongside the Poles. They were experienced men, young, but they had no personal connection to the city below. The British wing commander opened the briefing. He laid out the routes, the targets, the timings, and at the end, he did something unusual. He invited a Polish officer to address the room. Szostak stood up. Brian Desmond Jones, the South African bombardier sitting in the fourth row, recounted the scene decades later in a documentary interview. He remembered it, visibly shaken. His exact words, "Right at the end of the briefing, the wing commander invited a Polish squadron leader to address us, and he stood up and, very emotionally, I can see him now, he was very emotional. He said, 'My country, Poland, is in serious trouble, and I plead with you, South African and British gentlemen, to help Poland tonight.'" The room went quiet. 28 crews looked at this 28-year-old Pole, begging, that's the right word, begging, them to fly with him to Warsaw. For the parents and mothers and small children who were under German bombs at that very moment. 1 hour later, Szostak's Liberator GR-SBZ-965 took off from Brindisi. And here's what no one predicted, and what changed the destiny of the entire operation. It wasn't Polish courage that convinced Churchill to keep going. It wasn't diplomatic pressure. It was that scene. The South African pilots, men 6,000 kilometers from home, fighting a war that wasn't specifically theirs, came back from the night of August 14th and reported what they had seen to their officers. They reported that the Poles were flying home. They reported that the Poles were flying knowing they would die. The solidarity between crews became the moral justification to continue an operation that no longer made mathematical sense. The Poles forced the operation to begin on August 4th with the insubordination. The Poles forced the operation to continue on August 14th with Szostak in that auditorium. And that very same night was the night the 1586 lost its finest pilot. Szostak's Liberator never came back. But to understand what happened in that aircraft, and in the 7 others that fell the same night, we need to go inside one of them. We need to understand what it physically meant to fly from Brindisi to Warsaw in 1944. Fortunately, a navigator named Antoni Zagorski left a minute-by-minute diary of the same night, and he survived. August 14th, 1944. 1938 hours. Runway 10 at Campo Casale, Brindisi. Halifax JD 171, call sign B. Baker, begins its takeoff roll. Inside the glazed nose, Lieutenant Antoni Zagorski opens the navigation log. The first words he writes are the only ones possible. 1938. We are in the air. The aircraft is nicknamed within the squadron as the decrepit old wreck. It earned its reputation after one of its wing flaps lowered itself automatically mid-flight. Crews who flew it considered it bad luck. But it was the only Halifax available that night. 800 miles ahead, Warsaw is burning. 700,000 civilians are still trapped in the buildings. The Home Army has been out of ammunition for 4 days. Szostak's Liberator took off 11 minutes earlier. 23-28 hours. Over the Carpathians. Zagorski uses the star Polaris to navigate. Classical celestial navigation from the pre-radar era. He writes, 23-28, Polaris position, 49 degrees, 32 minutes. That's it. It's almost Novi Sącz. They're over Polish soil. Below them, dark villages, train stations, factories. Somewhere down there, partisans of the Home Army are lighting torches toward the sky, signaling the aircraft that they're back, that home still exists. 0 hour 45. Approaching Warsaw. The Halifax descends below 300 feet. It flies between buildings. The pilot, Kazimierz Jankowski, follows the Vistula at 150 feet of altitude. And then, to the west, the sky glows, but not with stars. The entire city is on fire, visible from 60 miles away. The crew no longer needs the map. Zagorski writes later in his diary, "The sight took our breath away. Sky and earth merging, fire everywhere." 1:45 in the morning, the cross of lights. Over Platz Kraszinskich, women are lying on the ground, flashlights strapped to their chests, dressed as peasants to avoid German suspicion in case the bomber missed the drop point, forming a cross of light. Bomb door open, 15 seconds over target. Drop it! 12 containers fall. In each container, 330 pounds of weapons. And also, in the preserved memoirs of pilot Choleva, oranges, almonds, dried figs. Each Polish crew added a personal sack to their drop, with a handwritten tag, 3 words, "From the crew." The meaning was simple. Weapons sustained Warsaw's body. The oranges were so the city would know there were still people out there thinking of it. 1:46. Emergency climb. Zagorski continues his diary, his handwriting now shaking. "The searchlights cross above us. We hope against hope they won't drop low enough to catch us. No such luck. A hail of shells comes right before the nose of our wreck. The flak from the German citadel has found them. The Halifax climbs hard. Within seconds it's above 3,000 feet. They escape along the rail line Pruszków-Skierniewice. 2 in the morning. Combat with an armored train. A German armored train opens fire from below. Choleva, in another Halifax that same night, describes it in his diary. "We too opened fire. The Halifax has machine guns in dorsal and ventral turrets. For 30 seconds, the Polish crew trades bursts with a German train 200 yards beneath them. Then they vanish into the dark." 3 in the morning. Junkers and Messerschmitts. Between Tarnów and the Carpathians, 2 German night fighters chase the Halifax. They miss by 100 feet. They miss by 50 feet. The Halifax flies blind through a thunderstorm. Fuel critical. The crew prays. Somewhere in that same night, on the same route, but in the opposite direction, Szostak's Liberator is being hunted by another night fighter, 16 miles short of base, near Bochnia, without warning the others. 6:38 in the morning. Brindisi runway. Zagorski writes the final entry of August 14th to 15th. 6:38. We land. After 11 hours and 10 minutes of flight on that lousy Halifax 2, with just a few drops of fuel left. 11 hours, 10 minutes, almost 12 hours in the air, the average duration of a Brindisi-Warsaw flight. He climbs down from the Halifax. He walks to the canteen, asks for tea, looks at his watch, 6:45 in the morning. And only then, looking at the empty room where other pilots used to be, does he realize 3 entire crews didn't come back. Among them, Szostak's Liberator GRS. 5 hours earlier, at the exact moment Zagorski was landing in Brindisi, in Warsaw, on Tamka Street, soldiers of the Home Army opened one of the containers that had fallen during the night. Inside, they found anti-tank Piats, Sten machine guns, gammon grenades, plastic explosive, and below the weapons, at the bottom of the container, wrapped in newspaper, 3 oranges, a handful of almonds, 2 dried figs, with a handwritten tag, "From the crew." At that exact moment, in Bochnia, in the still smoking crater of Szostak's Liberator, German soldiers of the Night Fighter Regiment were collecting the bodies. 7 men, ages 21, 22, 23, 28, 28, 29, 34. None of them would ever go home. And none of them could know that in that very same morning, on a street called Tamka in Warsaw, someone was placing one of the oranges they had dropped into a child's backpack to take to a basement. The night of August 14th to 15th, 1944. the deadliest night of the entire operation. 26 Allied aircraft took off for Warsaw that night. 8 fell. 4 fell over the city. Halifax JN-926 of the Royal Air Force fell on Wola, the Western District, hit by flak. Crew lost. Liberator EW-264 of the Royal Air Force exploded mid-air over Ochota, southern Warsaw. No survivors. Liberator KG-836 of the South African Air Force took a flak burst over the historic center. Its wings touched the rooftops of Miodowa Street. The aircraft caught fire. It crashed between 2 buildings. The entire crew killed. The fire spread to neighboring buildings for 30 minutes. Liberator KG-871 of the South African Air Force crashed in Praga, the eastern bank of the Vistula. No survivors. And 4 fell on the way back. Liberator KG-873 of the Royal Air Force was shot down near Tarnów by a German night fighter. 7 dead. Liberator KG-828 of the Royal Air Force was shot down near Tarnów as well. 7 dead. Liberator KG-939 of the South African Air Force was hit by German flak over Otwock, southeast of Warsaw. It crashed in farmland. 2 dead. 5 survived, captured by Soviet troops, interned, eventually transferred to the British. And Liberator KG-890 of the Polish 1586 GRS Szostak's aircraft, known throughout the squadron as Death on the Container, was shot down near Nieskowice Wielkie in the county of Bochnia, 16 miles short of target on the way back to Brindisi. The crater is 3 meters deep. Polish villagers, in secret, retrieve the bodies before the Germans arrive. They bury the 7 men in a temporary trench in the woods. Later, after the war, all 7 are exhumed and brought to Krakow. Today they lie in the Rakowicki Cemetery, Plot 3, Row A, graves 1 through 6, side by side. Flight Lieutenant Marian Szostak, 28 years old. Wife, Victoria. A newborn son he would never see grow up. Warrant Officer Józef Bielicki, 22, second pilot. Flight Sergeant Wincenty Rutkowski, 23, flight engineer. Flight Lieutenant Stanislav Daniel, 34, navigator, the oldest in the crew. Warrant Officer Tadeusz Dubowski, 21, bombardier, the youngest. Flight Sergeant Józef Witek, 29, radio operator. Warrant Officer Stanislav Malczyk, 28, air gunner. But 12 of the 26 aircraft drop their loads. Plac Krasinskich, Plac Napoleona, the eastern bank of the Vistula. 48 containers reach the insurgents that night. 2 tons of weapons. Ammunition that sustains the fight in Wola for another 48 hours. In one of the Polish aircraft that returned, Halifax JP-251, P. Peter, commanded by Jan Cholewa, the tail gunner Tadeusz Ruman looks back at the city as they leave. He watches the glow shrink on the horizon. He thinks of one phrase, which he later writes in his diary. I think of my friends and kin there, in those fires. On the morning of August 15th, Polish Radio London announces, last night, Polish aircraft carried out airdrops over Warsaw. Somewhere in Warsaw, someone hears that. Somewhere in Toronto, 43 years from now, a man named Stanislav Król will hear that same line again in a recording, and he will cry for the first time in decades. But that's another story. The story of this night ends like this. 35 Allied airmen dead in 15 hours. 12% of all aircraft shot down. 2 tons of supplies delivered. And 1 Polish crew, Szostak's, vanished without his family knowing for over 3 months that he was dead. If this story is hitting you, if you're thinking about men aged 21, 22, 28, who died trying to save a city 3 Allied governments had already given up on, hit the like button. It helps the algorithm show this story to other people who need to know what these pilots did. And in the comments, tell me which names stayed with you. Szostak, Daniel, Bielicki, Rutkowski, Dubowski, Witek, Malchik. They lie side by side in a cemetery in Krakow, and most visitors who walk past their headstones today have no idea what those 7 men did in a single night in August 1944. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. The next episodes will honor other Poles who fought in other people's wars. September 13th, 1944. The 1586's last mission to Warsaw. Liberator KH-101 is shot down over Hungary by German flak. 7 dead. The crater still exists today. In Szentes, a small Hungarian town, a memorial keeps the names of the 7 men. Lewandowski, Szejnowski, and 5 companions, carved in stone. September 14th. The Commander-in-Chief of the Polish Armed Forces in exile, General Kazimierz Sosnkowski, awards the 1586 Polish Special Duties Flight RAF an honorary title, Obrońców Warszawy, Defenders of Warsaw. The only time in the entire war that this title is granted to a Polish air unit. September 18th. Stalin, finally, allows a single American shuttle mission. 110 B-17s drop 1,200 containers, but the city has been reduced to a narrow corridor. Only 18% of the containers reach the insurgents. October 2nd. Bor Komorowski surrenders. The Warsaw Uprising is over. 200,000 Polish civilians dead, 85% of the city reduced to rubble. November 7th, 1944. The 1586 is dissolved at Brindisi, but it doesn't disappear. It is reformed as 301 Squadron, Land of Pomerania, Defenders of Warsaw. Major Stanisław Król, the official commander, refused to return to Communist Poland. He emigrated to Canada. He died in Toronto on May 6, 1987, age 75. Buried 7,000 miles from home. Major Eugeniusz Arciuszkiewicz, the man who asked, "Gentlemen, who'd like to go to Warsaw?" also survived. One of only 3 pilots of the 1586 awarded the Złoty Krzyż Virtuti Militari, Poland's highest military decoration. Tadeusz Ruman, the tail gunner who wrote, "I think of my friends and kin in those fires," survived. On August 27, 2003, he was quoted, "The Russians, who could have come to our assistance at any time, never fired a shot. That, I believe, was the greatest betrayal of the Second World War." In 1992, 67 veterans of South African Air Force Squadrons 31 and 34 received the Polish Warsaw Cross of the Uprising, most posthumously. And on the tomb of the unknown soldier in Warsaw, on August 27, 1983, 4 words were added in Polish. Loty do Polski, 1941 to 1945. Flights to Poland. In August 1944, 3 Allied governments refused to save Warsaw. Hitler wanted the city destroyed. He succeeded. Stalin wanted it to die alone. He almost succeeded. Churchill called the missions suicidal. He was statistically correct. Only 1 unit ignored all 3. They flew because, from where they sat, Warsaw wasn't a foreign city. It was home. And when home is burning, you don't ask for permission to enter. You go, even if it costs you your life, even if no one afterwards knows your name. Today, in the Rakowicki cemetery in Krakow, in plot 3, row A, 7 graves lie side by side. Most visitors walk past without stopping. They don't know that these 7 men flew the most dangerous mission of the Second World War. They don't know because their story was told first by South Africans, then by the British. For decades, Communist Poland forbade their names from being taught in schools. Why did this unit fly when everyone else asked them to stop? Because home was burning. And even when you know you're going to die trying, you still go. Now you know. And knowing is the first way to give them something back. But the Halifaxes and Liberators of the 1586 didn't only carry weapons, they carried men. 316 elite Polish paratroopers, trained in secret in a 17th-century English country house called Audley End. Volunteers selected from over 2,600 candidates. 606 survived the training. 316 were dropped, in silence, into Nazi-occupied Poland. They were called the Cichociemni, the silent, unseen. Next episode, the men and a single woman, a 50-year-old university professor, who jumped from British and Polish Halifaxes into occupied Poland, who coordinated the resistance, who killed Nazis in Warsaw, who discovered the location of the German V-2 missile program at Peenemünde, who maintained communication with London using radios hidden in pianos. 103 of them were killed in combat or tortured by the Gestapo. 9 more were executed by Communist Poland after the war as traitors. How did a military operation that produced the finest soldiers of the Polish resistance end with the survivors being branded traitors by the very country they had defended? Next episode.